I'll do it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Diego Rappaport is now going to give his talk, The Primal Distinction, Geographical-Topological Phases, Resonances, and Supradual Logophysics for the Neurosciences. Go ahead, Diego.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm grateful for the possibility of presenting my work. Some of these names are rather unusual, like logophysics and supraduality. Geometrical-topological phases are better known to physicists, but not well enough. Although the whole panorama of theoretical physics and technology has changed since they were discovered. Although they were known previously through the geometry, which I will introduce as the geometry of this transcendental surmounting of the Cartesian cut, which is practically a fusion of the material, imaginal, semiotic, and cognition domains through geometry, which is not a geometry of objective space as a given, as is the case of the theory of relativity, but is a geometry which transcends this as it brings into the very definition of it principles of self-reference and altered reference, heteroreference. In the case of the theory of gravitation, well, this is torsion, a torsion geometry, which is the primeval form of the vortex. And in the case of the theory of relativity, the torsion is by default null. So this work of mine, which has been going on for 40 years, starting from mathematical physics as a program of geometrization of it, in fact, stems from the very solution of the Erlangen problem as it was pursued in the 20th century by Cartan and followers, which led to the notion of the torsion geometries as a distinction from which space and reality and more appear. So what I have pursued is a transdisciplinary unification of science and knowledge, in which the psyche enters as much inseparably from the material world. So it's a world which we construct. There are some references here, what I've developed in the last 10, 12 years, after somehow going beyond mathematical physics. So let us start by the distinction, the primal distinction. We'll recall that from nothingness, so to speak, by placing a distinction, the world comes to be. Now, this distinction, to be able to transcend the dualism that this distinction as a boundary puts on, we have to abandon the plane. That was what Spencer Brown led to introduce the imaginary values. Now, we have to return to the plane as well. And the way which we choose to make as nature's world we identify is by self-penetration. So we remain two-dimensional, but by a very odd, so to speak, novel way of doing it, which is by self-penetration. So this Klein Bottle that comes out of it simply is another path, completely another path to the usual path of dualism in terms of whatever image schema you want to put, but in geometrical terms, the dualism of an inside and an outside, which even the sphere is not static to it, because there is a theorem of topology which demonstrates that one can pull out in a sphere smoothly without rupturing it or producing any discontinuities, not even a tangent, by simply intermediary steps which are given by these kinds of topology, the Mobius strip, the Klein Bottle, and the more complex ones. So it is not the dualism that puts the sphere as final, but really can be transcended by considering the possibility of outside and inside becoming continuously transformed one into the other, which is what the Klein Bottle does in a very peculiar way, which is not the usual way, the Cartesian way, in giving an objective world as given, but is one in which, by self-penetration, puts the psyche at the same level that the material world. Already McCulloch, when he introduced with Pitts the theory of neural networks through dual logic, 2 years later, he published a very short article in which he stated that to account for the top-down connection of the brain, for the circularity by which the brain operates, one must leave the plane and return to it at the same time. But this stores something absolutely different, which is what is usually professed in the neurosciences, a top-down organization, either of the mind or the brain or the world. What this puts out is a non-hierarchical, heterarchical, hyper-Klein Bottle organization. Here we have, for example, the Klein Bottle as a four-state locational logic in which you have four states which are somehow introduced by a self-penetration. So you have an absolute inside-outside mediating to pull out to the world to be born as an outside-inside, and later to be an absolute outside-outside, which seems to be absolute, but is not. Codifying this, one can reproduce genomes by recursivity using the tensor product as Lou was talking in at the coffee time. One can reproduce the nilpotent universal right system of Rowland's, from which one can somehow generate much of physics. I'm putting here on the left a cuttage of the Klein Bottle through the longitudinal side, the self-penetrating one, to see there we get two opposite chirality Mobius strips. This will be very important later. So how do we get the Klein Bottle? We get the Klein Bottle, as Lou said, we think of a rectangle in which two sides are joined with the same direction, another two are joined oppositely. So first we get a cylinder, which it curves to penetrate and return. But as I was saying, we want another more complex, and remember that complex is translated etymologically as folding order. And this order is not of a single Klein Bottle, is an heterarchical order in which inside, there are levels of inside and outside, which are not absolute. They are interwoven, as here. Notice, for example, that the innermost core continuously transforms to the outermost, and the intermediaries as well. Okay, ecological, sociocultural, biological systems are precisely this fusion of different orders to give what we have. other representations, and the quantity and the quality of these representations is absolutely open and not final. We can never know what else can be brought into consideration to have a topology for experience. It can never be final. For example, this one here on the bottom, I like to call it Hegel's helix, Hegel's spiral, because of precisely the spiral form, but it returns to itself. It's not Hegel's open-ended, but it returns to itself. So this is absolutely a novel order of organization. Now, what this brings into consideration is harmonics. The world of proportions of Pythagoras, and Lou explained this in his presentation, is already evident in the Mobius strip, the Klein Bottle as well, because you have to make two turns to retain to the same point. And the lines which seem to be, the red lines, which seem to be above and below the medial line, are not nor on top nor below. They are connected. They are all one single curve. So here there is a 1 which is a 2 and 2 is a 1. And what this brings up to? This brings a protoform of Newton's third law. I call it rather than Newton's metaphysics of action and reaction. Because if you look at the point P here in red, pointing outside to the figure, if you return it 360 degrees, it will be placed on the side which we cannot see, pointing to the other direction. So action and reaction actually are one and the same in here. And finally, to return to P, you have to give another 360 complete curve. This has another bearing of this. It's not only the 2 to 1 and the 4 pi symmetry of relativistic quantum mechanics. It's something much more important, which is the topological phases, the geometrical topological phases, which were discovered by Pancharatnam in India, 1950s, and by Michael Berry in England, and which from the 1990s, 2000s, has become a revolution, so to speak, in optics, in material science, in nanotechnology, by which what we have now in sound, even in acoustics, what we have now is a completely new science in which sound appears to be so trivial is no longer, because the polarization of electromagnetic waves, sound waves, pressure waves can no longer be circular, but they can take non-orientable forms. So this is absolutely new. And I want to say, if you cut a Mobius strip, I want to introduce now the torsion geometry, which bears upon the non-duality of continuity and discontinuity, which is already the case of the Klein Bottle. The Klein Bottle does not break the world into continuity from one side, discontinuity to the other. It's obvious. The self-penetration makes them both coexist. But I want to introduce the torsion geometries, cutting through these vertical lines. It does not open to a rectangle, but to a trapezoid. And the trapezoid, which actually will later be the pentagon, of course, is phi, is the universal structure of the vortex. You can see it here in the case of dislocated crystals.
I just want to give you a sort of a few minute warning if you want to have some Q&A time, okay?
Oh, how much time do I have?
Oh, well, if you want some questions and answers segment, then maybe another few minutes. And then we can do some questions.
Okay, well, thank you. So we have a geometry which is pervasive to the material world, but it's pervasive as well to the world of the psyche. Here we have how the visual processing is done in the cortex, which turns to be a Klein bottle. We have it as well in the case of music. N chords reside on a Klein bottle. It's fundamental to vision as well. When we move towards any direction, moving an eyes or the environment moving in front of us, what we are enacting is simply projections of isoangular direction of where we are looking to, which basically gives you this very strange figure over here, the pinch torus Klein bottle. What is remarkable of this, it is not that this corresponds only to vision or to the somatosensory world. The experience we get through the skin, not only through the eye, which is part of the skin, is also turned into a Klein bottle in the somatosensory cortex as a unity of action and perception. But the very structure of the heart is given, if you see here to the right, the heart is not a container. It is a Moebius strip. When very simply, not even cutting it, you extend it and you get precisely that. But I wanted to go to something which is crucial to the formation of experience, the most elementary field, physical field for the formation of experience, which are the spikes, the action potentials, which each neuron behaves in terms of responding to the stimuli. So the usual idea is that the neuron operates with a firing, not firing dual logic. This is done in neglect of basically the behavior of what happens in the interior of the neuron, which is continuous wave-like. And it can be represented through dynamical systems. Now, the usual way in which they are represented through dynamical systems, which are nonlinear, is considering that neurons do not have that as fundamental, this threshold, sub-threshold behavior. So they're considered to be what is called integrators. They perform temporal integrator. But what is ironical is that they are not an adequate model, because it is known already more than 20 years ago, and this is the core of the present investigations in neuroscience. Neurons are resonators. They filter and choose, so to speak. They resonate with certain frequencies and filter out others. In the case, for example, of Penrose and Hameroff, he considers neurons to be integrators. That's basic to the theory. Now, presently, the last 8-9 years, developing a new scanning technology, it has been able to observe this sub-threshold phenomenology, which brings us to the notion that really the cell is a tensegrity structure given by resonant fields. the tubulins, the proteins, the microtubules, all of them are resonating in a range of frequencies with probably non-orientable phases in an heterogeneous medium.
You may want
this is the case of course, all of this is the case of liquids, liquid crystals, which is the very basic organization for life. So the elementary proposal that has come to me is to consider that subthreshold resonant structures is that of a Mobius form resonator, which is superconductive and superinsulator, whose edge vibrational modes of acoustic and electromagnetic fields, which regulate the formation and disintegration of the cytoskeleton. Is there any evidence in this regard? Well, actually, this group of India, where the head is Bandyopadhyay in Japan, have been able to, through this scanning technology, to measure and observe the subthreshold phenomenology of neurons. And what they have discovered is two optical vortices at the essence of the action, which are rings. They do not state whether these rings are tutori or whatever, but they do state that if you stimulate the structures, subthreshold structures of a neuron with an alternate current, what you found is running a complete range of stimulation. What you get is a geometrical phase, as it happens with electromagnetism, with sound, with pressure waves, etc.
Oh, pardon me. So, Diego, we need to conclude and...
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you well.
Could you conclude now so that we have a moment to
talk about what we are here is a very remarkable homology between the world in which we conceive as objective real and with a geometry which is based on self-reference and heteroreference in all the scales and in all phenomena, including the psyche. So it's not a world defined objectively, but it's a world continuously construed in which, instead of panpsychism, you have this supradual ontology, epistemology, working at all scales and in all phenomena. That's what would be the resumption.
Awesome. Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Francis.
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, there we go. Hi there. Oh my goodness.
We have to keep our Q&A to just be nil.
Okay. Well, I just want to say that is a tremendous introduction to what I will be giving you tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Okay. You know something.
I have a question.
Out of this. What is your name? Excuse me.
This is Francis Jeffrey, but I'm on Janine's machine, so I appear named on the screen as Janine. There. Hi.
Okay, very good. And we have Stephen Wolfram now, I think, coming on. So let's just wrap it up.
I have a question for Diego.
For 1 sec, okay, and just like less than 1 minute, really, this time.
Okay, it's a short question. It may require a longer answer. In the theorem that I proved in my talk, I proved that the Klein Bottle connected sum with the projective plane is a torus connected sum with a projective plane. In other words, a threefold connecting of a projective plane with itself gives just the projective plane and a torus. It means that in thinking of physics of interactions involving projective planes, you fundamentally have the projective plane and the Klein bottle. Everything reduces to that. That's the theorem. And I wonder how it relates to the dynamics in your models.
In my model, what I presented in Law 50 was the fact that already when one focus our vision on a still point, what allows us to construe that vision and the notion of selfhood is the fact that we are not looking at the infinity, but we're looking on a tangent plane which is immersed on the projective plane. So what defines our identity as three-dimensional subjects is our immersion through the Moebius strip of the Klein bottle. The fact that the Klein bottle cannot be produced in 3D if not in liquid crystals, which can crystallize, as you showed, Louis. But
right. Let me focus my question for you. Imagine that a peak, that a Klein bottle is a kind of an individual. It is the self-referential loop.
Hey, Lou.
And then you have an interaction of 300 of them.
Hey, you guys, I'm sorry. We should cut the Q&A short at this time, but we, of course, have the material and we should continue the discussion virtually. But for now, we must cede our time to continue on track with the program. And I'm going to give it over to Graham in just a second. He's going to introduce us to Stephen Wolfram, who will then present. So I just want to thank Diego one more time, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.